Hi, welcome to our Revolution Washington Bernie-Kratz Coalition vetting interview of Scott Stafne from Congressional District 1 here in Washington State. Welcome, Scott. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Can you tell us a little bit about your district?
Sure. It's Congressional District 1. We're kind of a mountainous area. We have parts of Bellevue, and we go up through Skagit County, Snohomish County, and parts of Whatcom County. We don't necessarily go over to the coast, but we do have Bellingham, parts of Bellingham. We're just like all the districts. We've been gerrymandered so that the Democratic Party is more likely to win this election, or is intended to win this election.
Okay, well, that leads me to ask, can you tell us what you're running as?
I'm running as an independent. I ran last time as a libertarian, and that's because I prize liberty. And liberty to me means that you have liberty to have health care, you have liberty to go to school, you have liberty to drive on the streets. But the libertarians, in my view, haven't quite gotten together the way they promote an economic system that will promote the liberty I prize. So while I believe strongly in liberty of those God-given rights that we're intended to have, I'm not sure the libertarians have figured out how to give us that liberty. And I'm about that liberty more than anything else.
All right, that's interesting. I usually have a follow-up question, but for people who have a history of libertarianism, and I feel like you already addressed it, which is like the economic side. So.
Well, and that's why I can't be a libertarian. I mean, they talk about, well, we don't believe in crony capitalism, but they haven't convinced me that capitalism by its very nature is not going to be a crony system. That's kind of what happened to our country. That's why we don't have free electricity. That's why we have Edison versus Tesla. I mean, the government has worked against the people for a very long time in this country.
Excellent. And can you, okay, so next I'd like to move into, we have a list of things. It's, we like to ask if you think that what's on the list should be privatized or public, or a public service. So basically socialized.
So let's talk about that distinction, because I kind of addressed it in liberty. I think people should have the liberty to get an education. I think government should provide that. I don't necessarily agree that the word socialized is the best way to say that. I don't care if capitalism provides it or what economic system provides it, but people should have health care. People should have the right to go to school. I mean, and these are governmental functions. So, I mean, I'll tell you whether I think the government, and that's a responsibility of the government under the social compact as I perceive it.
Okay. So you already mentioned healthcare and schools. Postal service?
Yes.
Prisons?
Definitely. I think they need to be taken away from privatization. I mean, they create a form of slavery.
And Social Security?
Yes. I mean, I think people need enough money not only to survive, but to exercise the liberty of their God-given rights.
Foster care?
Yes.
Child care?
Yeah, yes. I mean, all those things that go to living and basic rights, I believe the government needs to help with.
And you did mention electricity, and so we have utilities and water on there,
Yeah,
and then internet and cell service.
yes, definitely. I mean, otherwise, we have the private companies taking over and the people don't have access to the internet. I mean, we have that right now. They want some people to get fast internet, other people to get slow internet. It's like money determines who gets what. And what we got to understand is that robs us, the people, of the diversity that we need. I mean, it shouldn't be the 1% who determine what is the best art. I mean, right now, because money controls everything, money is the factor by which all things are decided. What movies we see, what art is out there, everything that is available. And let me not use the word money. Let me say it debt, because we have no real money in the sense other than debt. All of our dollars are Federal Reserve notes or IOUs.
And then we have public lands and natural resources.
Yeah, I'm in favor of public lands and natural resources. And I think what we're winding up with is we are losing all of those, but we're also losing private land and resources, because I believe a while back it was decided that they would take people's homes, take people's property, and we're seeing the transfer of property and wealth into a very small number of people's hands.
And then we have banks.
What about banks?
Banks are on the list.
Okay, I
Should there be a public
definitely think
option?
they should not be privatized. And like I said, I've got problems with our debt-based system, and I have real problems with banks. For example, I think we should take a lot of the pot smokers or people got elected or got incarcerated based on those types of crimes, and we should put bankers who have committed crime in jail for a long time, because they harm society far more than these individual folks.
Okay. And then we have mass transit, like airways, railways, ferries, and buses.
Hmm. Uh, so now you get into the question of, do I believe whether or not there should be regulation of transportation, or whether I believe the government should provide transportation? And that's when we apply my liberty analysis to that. I believe everyone has the right to travel. Now, does that mean, like, it's easy for the I-405 corridor? I don't believe people should have the ability, just because they pay, to go faster than everybody else. Now, when you get to airplanes and stuff like that, I don't think that I want government making airplanes. But do I want them regulated so they're safe and provide people with the functionality to allow people to travel? Yes. So I mean, the notion in my thought to all these things is we have some God-given rights. The clearer they are, then I think government should provide them. When when you benefit by the fact that government is not providing them, because government really doesn't necessarily do all things well, then there is a more nuanced part to that question for me.
Okay. And then infrastructure?
Infrastructure, yes. The government should provide it. That's one of the purposes of government.
Okay. And military and its associated industrial complex?
I'm opposed to that. We have 6.5 times the military might of the rest of the world combined. We certainly don't need that, and we don't need to keep adding it, and we don't need to be the world's bully. Does the government need to have the ability to defend us as a people? Yes.
And it should be publicly funded as opposed to like Blackwater contracts?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I don't believe in Blackwater or private security. I mean, one of the great things about Russia, and I'm not that I'm talking about a lot of great things, but when Boris Yeltsin took over and the parliament had been surrounded by the tanks and guns, and I may have got this mixed up with the Ukraine, but I think in both cases, what happened were the people who were in the army related to the other people who were the dissidents. And so one gave them a flag and the army stood down. Now, when you have a mercenary army like we have, I think we can expect those people to primarily do what they do for money or debt disguised as money.
And then as far as the industrial complex that's associated with our military, would you, like Halliburton is a privatized, it's right now, the industrial complex is privatized. Would you keep it privatized, or would you take the profit out of war by making it a function of government than the production of war materials?
I would definitely, I don't like Halliburton, and I would definitely take the so ask me that question again, because it raises a lot of nuanced issues like with the planes. I mean,
Right.
do I want the government actually producing the instruments of war? And I don't like instruments of war for the first place, but let's assume that we need to create something for our defense. Do I think I want the government creating those things? Probably not. Do I want Halliburton creating those things? No. And do I want them working together to create those things? No, because then you get like the $500 or $1,000 toilet seat. I mean, and again, that's a problem of the money debt system we have. And so, you know, my answer, I'm not sure it goes back when I tried the liberty analysis. Clearly, I believe the government needs a reasonable force to defend this country and its people and defend. Sometimes I feel like it's being used against our people, but So I'm not in favor of having government do everything, because I don't think they're good at that. Now, how you devise a system so that there's a proper respect for the people, you know, I'm still, I haven't come up with that. And I'm not very good at, I can see problems. I think, but, you know, having all the answers, I don't have them.
Well, I just thought of one because I didn't have a solution, but maybe a worker owned co-op, because the workers would care, and it would be profit to the people who are making the product instead of to a company. So, but that just came to me, so it came out of my mouth.
Well, and that's good. I mean, that's the only way we're going to really find the answers. If what we want to do, and I think we do, is to make a massive shift away from where we're going. I think if we're to get away from the notion of 1%, the redistribution of wealth, we've really got to be thinking about it all the time. It's got to be kind of in the back of our brain.
Mm-hmm. And then I do see that we have some questions from YouTube. I'd like to get through the list. I think we only have a few more. Well, maybe 10. So we'll try to go a little. Provided by government or provided by corporations? So Veterans Administration.
Uh,
A function of government?
so yeah, it's a function of government. Do I think government should be in charge of it, or we should have a private group of veterans that it's not a political thing? Yeah, I'd prefer that to it being government, but if they're providing that service, that's a part of the social contract with the government. So it's the way we put it together that matters.
Okay. And scientific funding.
So what kind of scientific funding?
Well, so right now you have corporations who fund scientific fund. They fund science at universities, and then so when I think of corporations funding science, I think they're going to pay better to get science that reflects what they want to hear. So
right, like
whether
global
it be
warming.
yeah, I mean, be it on global warming or pharmaceuticals or, just about anything. My goal is a neutral science. I don't want funding to be a
To
push.
the extent you put it like that, I don't want funding to determine science. I read this thing by an engineer who had long been a member of an engineering group, and he dropped out because it said it's no longer about engineering, it's about funding their publications to say stuff. I mean, quite frankly, the government funds pharmaceuticals and then gives the patents away to the pharmaceuticals. I think I'm opposed to patents for the most part for large companies, particularly for pharmaceuticals, because it slows down cures, and it makes, they don't want to get the cures. What they're looking for is, treatments that they can treat some poor person forever. And so when I look at that, I believe that the funding probably should be governmental, and there should be no patents, and they should not be making profits off of that. Now, I think there's a big difference between patents and copyrights, however.
Okay. And maybe we'll talk about that sometime, because I'm curious, not because I know. And so space exploration.
The government, well, you know, here's the dilemma for the, I mean, the government is not necessarily the group that produces the best innovation. And so we've got to take that into account. Now, Elon Musk seems to be putting together something, but again, his goal is primarily money and debt. I mean, we need a way that that the people's interests are best reflected. And the problem is the government and private business have become so co-opted. When you're asking the question, you know, you've got to take into account, are they really different? I mean, it seems like they're a revolving door and they're both helping one another. They're not the government we were intended to have, a separation of powers and federalism. We've got a
Corporate
bizarre, we've got a bad government. It just doesn't work for the people. And so when you ask, well, would you really rather have corporations who don't work for the people or government that don't work for the people? I mean, it's hard to come up with an answer. I want liberty, and I want us to devise a system that will promote liberty for the people of this nation and ultimately of the world.
Excellent. So next on the list, and we've got just a few more, 5 more. Libraries.
Government.
Community housing.
And what do you mean by community housing?
Well, I'd say for the sake of this discussion, low income or homelessness.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the big things I care about.
Excellent. And elections?
I mean,
like
I don't
publicly
care
funded?
who pays for it. I just want to make sure that votes really get counted, and I don't believe they do.
Okay. First responders?
Yes, government.
And then this is kind of a newer idea, a caregiver's basic income. So if you're caring for elderly family members or permanently disabled people or children under, say, the age of 8, for the sake of discussion, that there be a caregiver's basic income that also reflects in their Social Security.
I believe that everybody should have liberties, so you need to be able to get your liberties. You know, in the present context of where we are now in the world, yes, I think people are entitled to that caregiving, and I think that's a part of the social contract. And I think that probably is something that should be a decision made by the people and their representatives, but representatives of the people, not representatives of corporations or people who fund their campaigns.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So that's the last of our list. And I'm excited to hear more about different details of it. Brian, are any of the questions related to the list itself? And we can't hear you.
I don't see any that relate to the list itself, but I haven't seen all.
Really relating to the list, but there are some separate questions. If we have time, there's about maybe 4.
Are they related to the list that we the rest of our?
Yeah, so I'm going to go into the next. Some of it falls into what we have lined up already. So
okay,
if that's all right. So yeah, I think we're done with the list right now, I believe.
So thank you, viewing audience. We will get to those questions, and if they related to what we've already discussed as a group before we started, then we'll wait to get to those topics. So thank you. All right, Rhonda.
Actually, like I said, one of the couple of questions in here did relate to what I was going to ask anyway next. So I'm going to actually bring in from the audience here. They've asked it a little bit better than I was going to, so I'm going to use theirs. So we regulate spark plugs on a national level. We feel we should regulate I feel we should regulate state workers' comp laws on a federal level, how we treat all injured workers across the country, so it's equal for all. The question is, will you support Senator Sanders and Patty Murray and Tom Perez's call for minimal federal oversight for our broken state workers' comp systems? And do you feel we need a state fix or a federal fix?
Well, let me say, first of all, I appreciate the problem. I did workers' comp law at the federal level for longshoremen. I also have done it at the state level, and it has gotten worse and worse and worse. And let me explain why I think it's happening. I think we are experiencing a pre-planned genocide, and I think people simply need to open their eyes to see it. We see it with regard to workers' comp. We see it in the foreclosure world where they stick people out, or people have to go out and live in tents in the middle of winter, and they don't even report how many die. I had on a radio show I do just 2 weeks ago, a lady that runs an organization called Dialysis Advocates. And back in the 70s, when it was real clear that diabetes was going to become more and more of a problem, they passed a law that gave everybody the right to dialysis. And there were only two companies that are involved in this now. And those two companies have no oversight, but they automatically get paid. And of course, they knew that diabetes was growing because the government has created the conditions for it to grow. So when somebody complains to this group, what they do is say, okay, well, you're no longer a patient. Since they can't be a patient anywhere else, they just die. Now, this type of genocide and what's going on in our prisons, is going on all around us. And so what my hope is that in this election, we will bring that issue to the forefront. The United States has to stop the genocide. And we know why the genocide is going on. It's going on to promote the elites. And one of the ways they utilize to do this is through debt slavery. Everyone is so busy working to be able to eat, have a roof over their heads. They don't even have time to open up their eyes and see what's happening to their neighbors. Think how many people you know that have been forced out of their home. What happened to them? I don't think it should surprise you that 90% of them die. We knew back in 2009 that homelessness cut 3 decades off people's lives. And now it's much worse.
Yes, it is. Thank you.
That's one of the things. So Brian had talked to me about this fellow who I think is asking that question. And yes, we need to deal with it. But one of the biggest problems is the administrative law judges and the courts that are dealing with it. And they are key to the genocide that is going all around us. You could even talk of it in terms of a judicial genocide. So one of the main things I want to do, and where I think I could be of great help, is reining in the courts, because under our system of government, it is Congress that establishes their jurisdiction. And for state courts under the 14th Amendment, Congress has great ability dealing with the state courts when they are not acting properly. And I can go on with that, but I don't need to.
I think we get the gist, and I believe you absolutely will fight for this. So kind of along the lines of kind of health and stuff. Do you support the incremental? So this is also from Oz out in YouTube chat, but it is one of our questions. I'll lead into it as well. Is, do you support the incremental approach to a single Medicare for all system of healthcare? If so, do you see incremental approaches using for-profit insurance systems to accomplish it?
So, no, I am absolutely in favor of an immediate switch to single payer. If I were, so what I believe a representative is not somebody who just goes to Congress and votes on laws, because that makes representation all about one day, election day, and that makes it all about why corporations can come in and manipulate votes by manipulating publicity. I believe, and I think the Constitution supports me, that the purpose of representatives is to serve their constituents, which is not just the voters, it's the people in their district. Now, the role that you play in enacting laws is not, and nor should it be, the primary role that a representative plays. A representative should be out among his constituents, helping to serve their interests, in my view.
Wonderful, thank you. So in regards to the healthcare, so here in Washington State, we are privileged to have the initiative process. We have an amazing group, Whole Washington, that worked really hard at putting a universal healthcare initiative together to cover all of our residents here. Are you in support of I-1600 as a state initiative to be passed on getting all of our residents covered here in Washington State?
Absolutely, and but I'm assuming that what you're saying is describing it, accurately. But I'm absolutely in support of people having healthcare. That's one of the ways the elites are using to kill us off right now. Can you even believe we'd have a debate about whether people are entitled to healthcare?
Right, it's insane. One last thing for me, and then I'll boost it out there to back to Courtney and Brian until a little bit further. So I'm part of Represent Us. It's a national organization. They are fighting for the American Anti-Corruption Act. I don't know if you've heard that about that or not. If you have you signed the American Anti-Corruption Act yet?
I haven't heard about it, but if it's against corruption, I'm against it.
Yeah, so it's a nonpartisan movement. It's aimed at passing the American Anti-Corruption Act. It focuses on strengthening existing election laws, increasing transparency in the political system, and public finance of our elections. So I'm assuming you are aligned. So I will send you information on that so you can look into it further.
I really appreciate it, and I'd like to ask, do you deal with the courts in it? Because the courts are probably the most corrupt part of our government.
We deal in working on legislation. So if it ends up going to the court system, we would through that way. So first you start, well, it's a tier effect. You can take the resolutions from, to your city council, county.
The problem, of course, is the court, no matter what you write in the law, if the courts get to interpret it and they do it corruptly, you're worse off. You've got to understand that since the very beginning of the Constitution, the courts have really never been attacked. Even after Dred Scott, they weren't attacked. Even after they said courts are not about justice, even though the Federalist Papers refers to them primarily as courts of justice. Our courts, I see as the biggest problem we have. If we straighten out the courts so we can get good decisions and they're not corrupt, I think we go a long way. But unless we see that as part of the problem, and the courts know we see them as a part of the problem, we're going to continue down this road because the courts are a part of the elite.
Right. Understood. Thank you for that. Yeah, we'll have to delve deeper into that. And now I know I have an ear to go poke at for some questions as we're working on those. Thank you. So go ahead. I don't know, Courtney, if you're ready to jump in, or Brian, or more questions out there.
There was one more question from Oz, and I think it's a pretty good one. It has to do with election. Was the 2016 Democratic primary rigged for Clinton? And was the 2016 general election rigged for the Russians favoring Trump? Oz would like to know.
First answer, absolutely. I mean, there's no way around it based on the evidence I've seen. And you know, sometimes I don't like making decisions on complicated issues, but that's not complicated. So I don't think much of this whole Russian thing. Quite frankly, I'm not. Different countries have been involved in our elections since the very first one. I mean, I don't see there's a difference between Russia coming in and promoting things that aren't true, and a difference between someone coming in and promoting the truth. And I don't have a problem with other countries appealing to the American people, especially when we live in this interdependent world.
Thank you. Is anything else? Okay, cool. And so we were also, the question you answered on your questionnaire about, let me make sure I'm getting to it. Minimum wage, the answer got cut off. And so I'd like to know more about your minimum wage.
So that's one of the hardest questions. And, you know, that's one that really talks to us about the importance of money or debt in our society. I don't make very much because of the cases I choose to work on. And I've come to believe that money is kind of not the love of money, but money itself is kind of the root of all evil. Because what's happened is the money has been sucked up into the stratosphere, and now just in order to survive, you need to have money. And people who don't have money have to have money to put into a machine to get money back. I mean, we're way off base. So with the minimum wage, I know because we don't make much money at my law firm that can be more than, you know, if we didn't have to pay minimum wage, we could have other people here. And there are a lot of charities like that too. So when you're talking about corporations or businesses that can afford to pay minimum wage, I'm entirely 100% in belief of that. When you're talking about you're going to put businesses that otherwise do good for people out of business, then I scratch my head and I say, is this really what we want to do? But the problem is not the minimum wage. The problem is that we have a society where everything is about debt and money. Like it's very important to me when I practice law that I can aim for justice, but you can't do that because you've got to pay your staff, you've got to pay certain fees. I mean, they make it so that everything has to be geared toward money and debt. And we as a world, we've got to get beyond that. I mean, and that's where I'm saying you got to keep that in the back of your head. I don't think, some people say, well, then you just believe in barter. No, I don't believe in barter. I don't believe that for me to do something good for you, I have to receive anything. I mean, I would do that naturally if I believe in where you're going. And I know a lot of people think like that, but we do have to survive. And so that's like when you talk about wage for caregivers. I mean, there probably should be a wage for everyone. I mean, when the Constitution got enacted and way back in various times, you could go out and drink water out of a stream. You could go maybe kill a chicken if you need to eat. I mean, you can't do that anymore. They have devised this society so it is totally dependent on money, and they don't even want you bartering now. I mean, and the government is in on this because they're the ones that prescribe the money and all of that. And again, I don't have all the answers, but I mean, some things are just very apparent as to what's happening to us and why the world and this country aren't working.
Thank you. So I do want to, also on the questionnaire, you mentioned, the question is, do you support whistleblowers like Edward Snowden and Julian Assange? And it reflects that you said no.
Well, then it reflects wrong. I mean,
I'm sorry, that one did reflect as yes. It did. No, option one was yes. Was on.
Well, it says option 2.
That was the question above it. Was I think it was the Bernie. Did you?
Well, in any event, let me be very clear. I support whistleblowers very strongly.
Okay, I'm sorry about that.
Oh, no problem.
The question above it was, did you support Bernie? So if you said yes to that, well, it says you said yes to that. So maybe
No, I didn't. That should be the one where I said no. So
I'll make sure that the public version of this reflects that.
Okay, and so then I also want to talk about gun control too, real quick.
Yes.
But with regard to Bernie, I supported Bernie as against Hillary and as against Trump, but I could not support the two-party system. So therefore, I could not support Bernie because he was a Democrat. And I've done a fair amount of writing on why we've got to get rid of the two-party, which is really only one-party system we have. And so I wound up voting for Gary Johnson, who was the libertarian, but that was out of principle, and I couldn't vote for Bernie as it turned out. But, you know, of all the candidates that probably reflected my views as with regard to universal health care and those things, he was the one I would most agree with regard to parties. And at that time, liberty, I was a libertarian and I supported that candidate.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. And then the next question is guns. And your answer to that was emphasis on like Bernie, like, because the question is, do you support gun control with some parentheses like Bernie Sanders? And you said emphasis on like Bernie Sanders. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I'm going to change that. So why I said like Bernie is Bernie comes from Vermont. He has always been a supporter of the Second Amendment. And this was I think about as far as he could go, and it makes sense. And it does make sense, you know, and it's really a hard question again, because we're dealing with young people who are in schools and they're saying, hey, we don't want to have to worry about getting shot. And there's no way that I or any human being, I think, can ignore that. And you know, when I was younger, I was in favor of gun control. It wasn't until I realized how bad our government was and how tyrannical it had become that I took another look at the Second Amendment, and I decided if we're going to have so many police killings, if we're going to have, you know, the military industrial complex, if we're going to have paid soldiers, then I would like, and I don't own a gun, but I would like people to be able to have guns, because history teaches us that the Germans got rid of guns, the Chinese got rid of guns just before they took over. And I'm sure you will leave this interview with one impression, or the most clear impression is, I don't trust the government. I think that we live in times of tyranny, and I think it's as bad as any tyranny that has ever existed.
Okay. And then I feel like my follow-up to that is, you know, and it's, you know, the government is so evil and tyrannical. Is there, well, this might lead into something further on the list, so I hesitate, but I'll leave it for now, because I think it'll get answered later. And so I think Brian had some questions.
We can check in with Tyler as well too. I'm not sure if
Oh.
he
Oh yes, Tyler
limits
might
his
have,
time or not, but
yeah,
You have time for that?
Yeah.
Okay. Hey, Scott. Hey, good to see you, man.
Good for you.
I have several questions for you. One is, my understanding is that you're petitioning us potentially for a best option and not an endorsement. Can you elaborate on that, on the dynamic of, you know, who's a Bernie-crat, who's left progressive, and why you're approaching, you know, despite being not 100% in alignment with Bernie's platform, what is your argument for petitioning this group?
Well, the argument is I want to be a servant for my constituency if I got elected in District 1. I'm not going to spend a lot of money doing that. I'm already doing a lot of stuff through the courts and in other ways. And so I'm just tossing myself out there. I'm not going to request funds. And, you know, I can't tell you anymore what the difference is between a Bernie-crat, a conservative, a liberal. And so, and the work I'm doing in California, you know, I think people may think I'm conservative, and I am conservative. I also think I'm liberal, and I am liberal. What I do is I kind of try to think about the things, and if I were to get elected, you know, I wouldn't want to be dialing for dollars, because that's not serving my constituents. So I don't want to be begging for money here. You know, I'm offering myself if people want this kind of help. And I'm also here to try to frame the issues. I mean, we should be talking about, are the people being served? We should be talking about, do we live in tyranny? We should be talking about, how do we create a better life for our young people? And I think the young people may wind up doing a lot of that themselves, because they've watched as their parents have struggled with banks. If a lot of them don't die, they will have seen what happens when you get thrown out of your home. I mean, from what I can tell, the kids are a lot more compassionate than are we. It was my generation, I feel, that kind of screwed a lot of this up. And so, you know, I think if I answered your question, and go ahead. And so what I want to do is, I don't consider myself a Bernie-crat. I don't consider myself a Republican. I don't consider myself a anything. The closest it comes is independent. But basically, I'm me. And if you think I can help do something for people, then I'd like them to vote for me.
Great. So on that same note, I want to know who else is running, who you're running against, and especially, my phone may die here in a second, but I want to know who else is in the race and why. You know, I know who you're running against, but I want everybody else to know who you're running against.
I'm running against a Microsoft millionaire, made her money. Her name's Suzan DelBene, and I don't think she has a clue how the rest of us live. I don't think she has a clue about how the court system works. But I'm not, I am running against her, and I think she's a great one for me to run against, because, I mean, I don't see her serving her constituents, and I could be wrong. You know, it'll be great if she comes out and says, well, I serve this constituent, or I serve these constituents, and I care about this issue, and show how it's the people she's serving, and not just certain big money aspects.
Yeah, well, I hear that, and I've looked at her voting record, and I will encourage the viewer to do the same. Okay, so I mean, I have more questions, and ladies, please stop me if we need to get back to other stuff. I'm happy to keep going, and have a lot I want to hear from Scott.
Please do, please do. You got the floor.
Okay, Scott. As you know, I'm a huge fan of your work in the world, and the more I learn about you, the more impressed I am, despite you know, being somewhat different ideologically, and we're not that different actually, just on paper. But what I really I'm asking you this as a setup because I want people to hear this as well. Can you tell me about your work in advocacy, and how, in my mind, you have actually managed to create a solution to a bunch of these problems that you're talking about at the grassroots level, what we would on the left would call the grassroots level. Can you give us a little bit about your how you have championed this concept of advocacy and how that impacts the world.
Sure. So as I said, I believe our court system is corrupt. And one of the ways it's corrupt is we no longer have an adversary system. The idea of an adversary system is two people go to court, you've got a neutral judge, and you've got two lawyers or two advocates for them. Well, anymore, only one side has a lawyer. And guess how many times that takes place? Guess in what percent of cases there is only one lawyer?
I would venture to guess it's a huge percentage.
It's 70%.
Right, okay, yeah.
And so, I mean, why even go to court? Because the judges will tell you they only listen to the lawyer. And so we no longer have like precedent because they have these unpublished decisions. And of course, we all know we haven't had trial by jury for a long time. So the very system that was set up in our Constitution, which was based on juries, and that was the democratic part of the court system, they got rid of first. Then they got rid of precedent. Well, actually, they got rid of the advocacy system, and now they've gotten rid of precedent. What we have is judges who exercise unlimited discretion and punitive power against people. I was talking to a fellow lawyer, a guy by the name of Gary Dubin over in Hawaii the other night, and he was telling me that years ago he had worked for the Justice Department and had given this that, you know, we should have juries in on plea bargains, because what they do is they'll get you, they'll arrest you, and could be on a bogus charge, and say, well, we're going to, if you go to trial, you risk having to go to jail for 10, 20 years. However, if you agree to plead guilty, we'll cut that down to a year, 4 months, or whatever. I mean, it doesn't get more corrupt than that. Think if you're not guilty and you're facing that situation, they're going to throw you away for that long, and you're not guilty, but you plead guilty so that you can get a lesser sentence. Now,
yeah,
there's something wrong with that picture, and I don't think you have to be a genius to see it.
absolutely not. And thank you for the work. I asked that question because I want to illustrate how much we have in common with the whole spectrum, and how, you know, for example, with the Black Lives Matter movement, how much we have to offer each other if we just know what each other are doing. You know, this incredible work that you do there could be so incredibly powerful across the country if employed at the level that we could do, you know, that we actually could do. And so I just wanted to draw attention to that. Is there
Well, what we have to do is get people to, one, open their eyes, and then look at the system as a whole, because so many people, it's just like making us forget about everything because we have to put food on the table. If you're only dealing with the domestic law system, which is terribly corrupt, then you're not looking up at the foreclosure system, which is terribly corrupt. And so you're not seeing the total scope of the judicial genocide that is ongoing.
Yeah. Okay, so last question before my phone dies. As you know, I'm also a champion of Article the First, aka the Congressional Apportionment Amendment. Can you give us a blurb about that? That's actually the last question, I believe, on our vetting questionnaire now. And I know you are the most knowledgeable, next to Eugene himself, basically the most knowledgeable person in the country about this case, as far as I know. Can you give us the Cliffs Notes on Eugene versus Laverne versus U.S. House of Representatives, and you know, the return of the original First Amendment?
Yes. So when the Constitution came after the Confederation, Articles of Confederation. And the purpose was to get the states so they could act together. And they came together for a constitutional convention, and they put that convention together. And probably the most unique thing about it was that the people were to actually be represented and served. And it's important to remember a representative is really there to serve their constituents. And so what they did is they wrote a constitution. Only one part of it really related to that concept of representation of the people, because the president was elected by electors who came from state legislatures. The senators were elected by state legislators. Only the House of Representatives was elected by the people. But let's be real clear, there weren't many people. About only 6% got to vote, and they were mostly white people, white men with property. So they pushed. And one of the biggest things is what our claim to fame is, that the people got representation through a republic, not a democracy. So when they were debating the original Constitution, they never got around to answering the question of how the House of Representatives would grow. In the initial document, in Article 1, what it says is you will have a representative for every 30,000 people, and it didn't talk about how it would grow. You'd have one representative for 30,000 people, and didn't say you'd get another one for the next 30,000 or thereafter. So one of the big issues when the Constitution went out to the states for ratification was how is this going to grow? And so when the ratification process went about state by state, when it got to Massachusetts, Massachusetts said, well, wait a minute, there's a lot of things you don't have in here. You don't have in the House states are important and how they have their own rights. You don't have in here due process of law. And so what Massachusetts said was, what we want to do is we'll ratify this, but you've got to agree that you'll send out amendments. And so that did go through. They ratified the Constitution. The first Congressional Congress met, and they put out 12 proposed amendments to the United States Constitution. Now, most of us are taught erroneously in school that there are only 10 and they became the Bill of Rights. That's not true. The first proposed amendment was Article the First, and it would be the First Amendment. And basically what it says is you have one representative per 30,000 until the House of Representatives reaches 100 members. And then each state has one representative for every 40,000 until the state reaches, or until the House of Representatives reaches 200 members. And then you shall have one representative for every 50,000 after 200. And that was how it was supposed to grow. Well, actually, that amendment passed. And so instead of having the 435 members that we have, we should have more like 6,300 members. And each House of Representative, each representative or servant of the people should come from a district of 50,000. And that's a district that you can go about and you can get to know your neighbors. You can get to know what their needs are. And that is a district size that works. So what happened was, after the Civil War, we had the 13th Amendment, which made African Americans people, because in the Dred Scott decision, the Supreme Court had said they were not people, they were property, therefore they couldn't come to court. The 13th Amendment remedied that. Then the 14th Amendment came along and said that people who were born in the United States were citizens of the United States and gave us due process, equal protection, and rights and privileges. Privileges and immunities is the proper term. And and it also, then the 15th Amendment gave Blacks the right to vote. Now that was a big increase. And then we had the 19th Amendment, which was passed in 1919 or 1920, that gave women the right to vote. And then we had the one that gave everyone over 18 the right to vote. So what have we done? We've expanded all these voters. But what haven't we expanded? Representation. And so what has happened is representation has become meaningless, because when you're being elected to a position where 750,000 people vote, it's almost impossible for them in today's world, where they have to earn a living, they have to work 3 jobs, to figure out who's going to best represent them. And the only time they get is probably on TV, and TV ads are expensive. So Article the First would restore the notion of what we tell the rest of the world we're about. We're about representation of the people when we're not. And sometime I'd love to explain to you how the Federal Reserve, and see, there's so many nuances.
Yes, there is.
Apportionment is how we determine, supposedly under the Constitution, the number of representatives. And they've kind of mooted that. And the way they've done that is, apportionment also used to be the way states were required to pay taxes. So direct taxes. So when the Supreme Court came in, or when the Supreme Court came in and said, look, you got income taxes are a type of tax, you know, and that they are decided by apportionment, they got the people to make an amendment that wasn't true. That same year, or within the next 2-3 years, they enacted the Federal Reserve Board, which gave Congress the ability to do whatever it wants, create debt for it, and then tax us to pay the debt. So it's never really us that's paying for anything. It's Congress is borrowing the money and throwing it back at us and making us owe the debt. So then the bankers have all this power over Congress and the people. I mean, the way they did it was perfectly planned, but you've got to understand a little bit of history in order to see what has happened to us.
Yeah, I would love to look at scheduling other times for set topics, because I'm learning a ton, and we can all use this knowledge. So I would love to look at getting together again. I think we hit on a lot of things. I don't need to end up really going through what I have on the rest of it, Courtney. So if there's anything that you want to make sure, and Brian too, needs to be asked or addressed, I'm good on what I had on my list.
Okay. I then also, I do want to say, so Article the First would put the put the government back in the hands of the people. Would that be an accurate interpretation? It would increase
More
representation.
so, I mean, it would mean that every 50,000 people would have a representative, and the way I'd like to see it interpreted is those representatives live in the district and they vote from their district, so they have to walk the same streets as their constituents. They have to talk to them, and they're not about dialing corporations for dollars. They're about serving the people they represent.
And that reminds me, so 50,000, so 50,000, and is it 750,000 in the districts in Washington, or 450? I've heard a couple different numbers, and I didn't do the research.
So,
You know?
So yes, for congressional districts, the average number is 750,000. Some states don't have that many people, and they get one representative. So, for example, I don't know how many people Wyoming has, but I know it's less than the 750. So they get a representative just because they're a state and have people. But if this were to go into effect, let's say they have 450,000 people, they'd have 9 reps.
Right. And we have 10 and an average of 750,000. Do you know if we're about average?
Yeah, we
Okay.
would be average for, now we're talking about United States House of Representative seats, because there's different numbers for whether you're talking about state senators or state representatives.
Well, so 50,000, 750,000 is, I think, 15 times.
Yeah,
So we have 10, and that would mean Washington would get 150.
Or even more, I think it may be 180. I don't remember. I know California would go to like 770 something.
That's excellent. So that, and then the House of Representatives is in charge of impeachment. Correct?
Yes, and we need to impeach some judges, and we need to show them we can, and they're also in charge of oversight. See, the way the Constitution is set up, your most numerous branch is supposed to be the Congress, the legislative body. The executive is supposed to be, executing the laws, and the court's supposed to be interpreting them. But what happened is we took this waylay during FDR's time, and we created an administrative law state. And so the things that our founders intended our government would be doing, we've got these administrative law judges handling. Like just yesterday, there was an argument in the Supreme Court about how much power these administrative law judges should have, because they're not appointed by the president and the Senate, and yet they decide issues involving millions of dollars, involving people's rights and liberties, and we allow that, or we may not after this next decision, but we'll see.
Okay. So we can impeach the president, we can impeach judges, it would eliminate gerrymandering, it would put the hands of the government back into the people.
Right.
And
well, one house, remember that, but see what they did at the same time. So what happened is, with regard to the apportionment, they were supposed to always be increasing. And they did that up until 1910, after every census every 10 years. In 1920, they didn't at all. And the reason was because there had been shift in the number of people to more urban districts, and that would have taken some people who were powerful and put them out of office. And so they didn't do anything. They just kind of ignored the Constitution until they got the Federal Reserve set up, and they got what they also did then is they switched senators over in the 16th Amendment to where they are elected by the people, which gives them the ability to claim, the people have more voice. But really, there is no voice when you've got one individual and like 50 million people. Like a senator of California is not answerable to the people. He's answerable to the people who get him elected by the people. And those are the people who have a lot of money and have the ability to give them debt.
Okay. Well, that's exciting. And I hope we make history fulfill itself.
I do too, because it's pretty clear that, people have long known that Article 1 was ratified. You need 3/4 to ratify it. And most people just pretend it doesn't exist. Now, one of the things that's really problematic with computers today is I'll go to look at law and the judges will change the law after the fact. And the Supreme Court claims the right to do that for up to 5 years until it comes out in a printed version, but they used to do it before. For example, in Washington's first memoir, he talks about the 12 amendments to the Constitution and coming out of the Congress to be ratified. And when his memoir was rewritten, that had been changed to 10. I mean, you can, if you look, you can actually observe where the country has been dishonest. There's a great book out now that talks about how Hitler's Germany, after Hitler took power, all the lawyers got together to study the laws of the United States because they looked at our blacks and saw that we treated them as second-class citizens. And they looked at our eugenics program. And so Hitler's race laws and genocide program were actually based on study of the United States system. And so we've always been pretty good at sounding very good, but I mean, in practice, that's not what we get. And we need to actually look at the things they talk about, because a lot of those are goals that we do want to live up to, but we need to look at what our government is doing, because we no longer have a republic, a democratic Republican government. What we have is an empire where some people believe that they are our rulers. And that was never how the United States was intended to be.
Well, thank you. And so we'll wrap up and tell people where you can be found and what they can do to help.
Word of mouth is how they can help. I mean, if you know people in my district, let them know. I can be found on our website, which is stafnelaw.com. I don't know if the Stafne for Congress site is up yet. I post a lot of academic and legal writings and blogs on academia.edu under my name. And I have my own blog, and I'm just about to put out a third installment on what we can do to help fight against the system of debt slavery, which has evolved in this country. But for the most part, I'm really busy. It's not going to be a a traditional campaign. I'm going to have to rely on the people to get the word out, because I'm not going to ask for money. Just won't do it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so very much, Scott. This has been a great time listening to you and getting to know what you're doing in your district. I appreciate your time coming on here.
Oh, well, I appreciate the opportunity, and I'm happy to talk to people. I'm probably not going to be able to get out and do a lot of campaigning, but this type of campaigning is easy to do.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Hold on, I'll end the stream here.